Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CANTO Conversations, a webinar series which explores the impact of COVID-19 on the ICT industry in the Caribbean and Latin America. This morning, we are very pleased to have three cable and wireless CEOs, and I'm extremely proud and grateful to Mr. Garfield Sinclair, who is the CEO of BTC Bahamas, and also the Vice President of the North Caribbean for Cable and Wireless Communications. Welcome, Gary. We are also very pleased to have Jenson Sylvester, who's the Country Manager for Flow Barbados, Cable and Wireless Communications. And last but certainly by no means least, we are pleased to have Mr. Kurleigh Prescod, who is the Country Manager for Flow Trinidad and Tobago. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Chairman.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Let me just start by asking each of you, how are you doing? How are your families?
I'm fine. We're doing great. Family's great. I do have some young adults in the family who happen to be in the U.S. right now and are passionate about all that is happening. So fingers crossed, praying like crazy. But everybody's good, David. Thanks.
Yeah, David. We're good. Family's good. We're coming out of a pretty intensive lockdown period here in Barbados, so things are starting to ease up a little bit. So we're thankful to be able to get out, get to the beach, and so on. So we're feeling good. We're feeling good right now.
Great. And Kurleigh?
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for having us. In terms of myself, I'm actually in the middle of a little week off, right? So feeling very relaxed, yeah. And having some really lovely time with the family. Family is healthy, immediate and extended family, so far unaffected by the crisis. So far so good, and keep praying to God that it stays that way.
Yes, amen. Let's pray that that remains the case. So gentlemen, this session today is focused on the future. We want to talk about the future of telecoms after COVID. And of course, I say after COVID in inverted commas, because we are aware that COVID is going to continue to impact the world for quite some time. But no doubt there are going to be changes. But before I get to your thoughts on what some of those changes are, can I quickly ask each of you to just talk us through a little bit of some of the impact of the pandemic in your markets and in your operations? Can I start with Gary?
Yeah, sure, David. I don't need to tell your audience that COVID-19 has had a massive impact on countries right around the globe. Obviously, the countries in the Caribbean have been no different. But like every disaster, it's cut both ways. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I mean, obviously, from a negative standpoint, the health, safety of our citizens have been challenged. So we've obviously focused quite a bit on ensuring that we manage to safeguard the health and safety of all our colleagues. Certainly one of our mandates was to ensure that none of our colleagues, certainly in the Bahamas and in all of our markets, none of our colleagues actually contracted the disease, and we engaged in all of the sanitization and the personal protective equipment that needed to be applied to the situation. We canceled the events, and this is well ahead of actually being locked down. We canceled events that would have brought lots of people together in the same place. So we at CNW are actually quite proactive in ensuring we canceled travel and business travel real early on in the process. So we were quite proactive, again, in ensuring the health and safety of our colleagues, which was our primary concern, as you can imagine. And we think we've done a pretty good job of that, frankly, given the small number of cable and wireless wide of colleagues who've actually contracted the disease. Really small amount in the Caribbean. I don't think anybody any of our colleagues have actually contracted the disease. So that was our first commitment. Because of all the anxiety that the health and safety issues were going to result in, culturally, we made a decision, and that came right down from the CEO of LLA, Bala Nar, we made a decision early on that we were not going to separate from colleagues either. Thought, you know, from a cultural standpoint, the last thing we would want to do now, and the worst thing for colleagues would be to hear that they were going to get separated from their jobs. At a time like this, people needed the certainty, the healthcare, and all of the benefits that come from working, being gainfully employed. And we knew that, you know, the anxiety people were feeling around the health and safety issues would have just been exacerbated. And families would have been, you know, really, really put out. And communities would have been disadvantaged if we engaged in any sort of wholesale separation of colleagues, even though there might have been good reason to contemplate such an outcome, because the second part, an impact of the virus, was the tremendous economic dislocation that's occurred. You know, I tell all of my colleagues that we manage the telecoms businesses in paradise. Of course, and that's true. The flip side of, you know, operating in paradise, though, is that you depend really heavily on the hospitality industry, and because of all the you know, the airport and seaport lockdowns, the travel restrictions, and just the curtailment of economic activity, the hospitality industries in all of our islands have taken a massive blow. All of the layoffs and job dislocations that have occurred has resulted in our customer base not exhibiting the same spending patterns, being a little slower to pay their bills. And so we've had to basically become extremely flexible and agile, and, you know, adapt to a situation where you couldn't have stores open anymore. You couldn't travel out on the road past certain times, depending on, you know, your curfew restrictions. And so we have to stand up stuff like virtual stores. Literally, we'd operate remotely and provide all of the same services and products we always did, but we do it remotely. Customers could interact with us through WhatsApp, through telephone, through email, and they would. We've done in the Bahamas alone nearly 50,000 virtual transactions to date throughout this pandemic. And it just showed the flexibility and the resilience of our colleagues working through what was an extremely tough time. So, like I said, it cut both ways. There were clearly health and safety downsides, but it's also made us really, really agile as a business with respect to the products and services and how we delivered them to customers and the way we worked as well. We've 90% of the colleagues in the Bahamas are still working from home, for instance. Fortune 500 did a survey of its top CEOs. Nearly 80% of them said everybody be working from home right through January 2021. And a full 28% of them said we'd never get back to 90% of colleagues working from these big gleaming buildings anymore. So there's no question this pandemic's going to change us, but it's also made us as a business way more efficient and effective at delivering our products and services to customers.
Thank you, Gary. That's a really detailed answer, and I think that provides so much clarity for our audience. Jenson, Kurleigh, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the situation for you in Barbados and Trinidad?
Yeah.
I guess, is it safe to say it's a similar story?
Yeah, very, very similar story. I think Gary touched on all the key points. Particularly here in Barbados, we have a heavy reliance on the hospitality segment. So, you know, that's been shut down for, you know, since the beginning of the crisis. And so, you know, it's had a major impact on the economy, a major impact on our largest customers. And so I think the impact for us has been the fact that we've had to work more closely with our key stakeholders, right? So, you know, we've had to work very closely with those customers who have, you know, going through difficult times. So we've worked very closely with them. Also with our government, right? So zero rating websites, working with the Teachers Association to make sure that the population, our students, have access during this difficult time. So on top of all of the things that Gary outlined, you know, making sure that our team members are safe, making sure that we adjust to the times in terms of using digital a lot more. I think the key has been working very closely with our government and our customers and making sure that we keep our critical elements of our populations connected, particularly our students, right? So that's been a very key sort of aspect to all of this, David, for us.
Thanks, Jenson. Kurleigh?
I mean, obviously, Gary and Jenson were pretty comprehensive in their answers. So not to repeat what they would have said, but probably just to add some flavor, you know, to some of the points that they made. In the case, we talked about, you know, us being proactive on the onset of this crisis in terms of being prepared. And, you know, two examples that strike me very closely. Even before all of these stay-at-home orders from governments came in, I recall internally as a business, our chief technology and product officer, he called for, and this is across Liberty Latin America, so this isn't just Cayman Islands, this is across the entire group. You know, he called for a dress rehearsal work from home, right? So this is while everyone was still going to work, people were still, you know, doing business as usual. The rest of the economies were still operating normally, but the threat was hovering in the region. You know, we conducted a dress rehearsal work from home where we got people at home, you know, and saw if our systems could have handled the different modus operandi. And it uncovered a lot, right? We found a lot of things we had to beef up on, a lot of gaps we had to plug, yeah? So that when the orders did start to come in, when the infections did start to happen, we had already identified a lot of the gaps. So the move to seamlessly work from home, right, could not have been executed any better, right? And that again was thanks to the foresight, you know, to do that dress rehearsal proactively. And then, you know, looking, you know, talking about, you know, the sort of the impact on our economy. So agreed, you know, with all of these shutdowns, you know, we've had customers who aren't able to move, to actually transit, to get to our stores and so on. So one of the ways that which we as a company have had to evolve would have been to move into the communities. So now it's not just a case where we have our stores open from 8 to 5 and we wait for customers to come. In certain more remote and rural areas, we had to now mobilize ourselves as a company and get into our communities, reach closer to our customers and make us accessible for them to raise queries, to buy products, to pay for their bills and so on. So I would say that this crisis has really allowed us to really demonstrate how well we can perform, how well we could deliver, how well we could impact the company, and it has really been rewarding to be part of that experience.
Thanks, Kurleigh. And you know, that leads perfectly into my next question, which is, you know, for Gary. And of course, I will get some perspectives from you, Jenson, and you as well, Kurleigh. But Gary, you are a distinguished leader in our business. You've led the Jamaica business unit to, you know, incredible growth. You're now, you know, in charge of the BTC business unit for the last few years during, you know, one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit the Bahamas in history. And you are leading people through a change, through difficult and turbulent times. Bahamas recently is a market that was opened up to competition. And you have a history of leading people through challenges. I'm very keen to understand your perspectives on the impact of COVID on people. And I want you to talk about the perspective of the customer, of our employees, of, you know, how do you think telecoms will be forced to change because of COVID?
Wow, Chairman, that is a loaded question. I'll try to answer it though in the best way I know how. A couple of things. We, you know, leading people through disasters like the devastating hurricane, and then now COVID, really just involves being a cheerleader. People are already, if you sit and go shoulder to shoulder with talented, passionate, committed, technically competent colleagues. All you really have to do is provide them with the support they need to do what they would ordinarily have done. What I found, certainly, particularly in the midst of disasters, is that people, almost their flight and fight response kicks in, and they're capable of almost superhuman effort and output. We saw it during and subsequent to the hurricane, the way the colleagues in the Bahamas really just stepped up to the plate, first to ensure, again, that all of their colleagues were safe, and then to ensure that our customers were restored to normality. Both business and residential customers were restored to normality as soon as possible. And when I say superhuman effort, I mean, I can't begin to relate some of the stories that our technicians actually engaged in order to get service back up in, particularly places like Abaca and even in Grand Bahama. So when crises hit, people tend to step up. People tend to, respond almost as if they're responding to an external trespasser or an external threat, and really, just explode from an output standpoint. We've seen that again during the COVID-19 crisis, where productivity has really just gone through the roof. Conventional wisdom suggested that, working from home, productivity would slip, people would start to sort of, slack off, and nothing could be further from the truth. And I don't speak for the Northern Caribbean. I'm sure both Kurleigh and Jenson will attest to the fact that people have just really stepped up. They have gone the extra mile, and again, without having to, really exhort them in any kind of major way. They've just really stepped up, working from home, provided tremendous support to our customers. And like I said, the pandemic and the hurricane, frankly, tends to bring out the best in solid colleagues and people. And that's really what we've seen occur. Now, the trick, to my mind, is to make permanent some of the adjustments we've had to make in order to deal with this crisis. I like to say again to my colleagues, we've heard it ad nauseum, you never want to waste a good disaster, right? And again, for all of the negative sides that this disaster has thrown up, the positive side of it is how productivity's increased tremendously, how hard we've worked to ensure that our customers and our customer experience has remained at an acceptable level and even exceeded customer expectations by, through working from home, through standing up virtual stores, through migrating customers from contact to non-contact channels of paying bills, for instance, by moving to e-billing so that customers don't get paper bills anymore, save a bunch of trees. How do we make that a permanent part of our operating model going forward? And that's the trick, I think, all of us, Jenson and Kurleigh as well, I'm sure, and throughout Cable and Wireless and LLA, we're focused on now. Is how do we make permanent some of the agility that we've had to show that has, provided us with so much extra efficiency during this really tough time.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you very much for that. Jenson, what's going to be different for customers in your view in the future?
What's going to be different for customers? Well, I think, what the crisis has uncovered, David, is that we need to accelerate what we have already started with respect to how we interface with our customers, right? So the use of digital platforms is not a new concept in how we interface and interact with our customers. And we had started down this road already, indeed, both on the consumer side and on the B2B side. And what this crisis has uncovered is now we need to accelerate that, because we went through a period where, as Gary mentioned, customers weren't able to go to the stores to pay their bills, to get new services, products and services. Our B2B customers didn't have the opportunity to interface with our sales teams to go through how we can build solutions for their businesses. And so now what we find is that the need for digital platforms has been accelerated. And so I think Gary framed it really well. How do we now make this permanent? How do we accelerate it and make it permanent? And I'm pleased to state that, we're ahead of the curve, particularly with respect to the B2B customers, and the fact that these large customers now, very much like us, are contemplating how is our workforce now going to work? What percentage of staff are going to remain working from home? What percentage are going to actually need to come into the office? And so we have solutions that are already being developed far along the road in terms of being developed to support our largest customers in this new way of working. So our customers on the B2B side have been affected very similarly to us. On the consumer side, as Gary mentioned, it's how do we interface with them? How do we continue to interface with them in a digital way? We had the foresight to be able to launch virtual retail stores, and the response to that has been, incredible. And so, how do we maintain that? How do we keep that going? The other critical one was we had to now do customer-assisted installations. As an example, we weren't permitted to go into our customers' homes, but if there was a fault, if they needed, a service, how do we work more closely with our customers to allow them to install new services? So what it means, David, is these are all, in my opinion, things that we were already thinking through. We have the foresight in our company to think about the future and think about how things are going to change. And what the crisis has done is accelerated that. And so we're very much in the right position to be able to respond to the requirements that the COVID crisis has brought forward.
Thank you, Jenson. Thank you. Kurleigh, you have a storied background in technology and in networks, and you've provided fantastic leadership in that field for years and are now providing leadership to the Flow Trinidad and Tobago business. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts about what does COVID mean for our networks in the future? What do you think are some of the consequences of this pandemic for operators from a network point of view?
Thanks for that, David. I think consequences is not quite exactly the word I would want to use. It has a negative connotation, but I would absolutely say that there's certainly an impact of the new economy, the new normal, as they say. What do we expect to see? We expect to see more work from home, more distributed or virtual offices and operations. And what that means is that, historically, how we've been designing our networks made certain assumptions around people going to an office during the day. And really when they, come back to their homes, they're really using, for the most part, I mean, there are the exceptions, but for the most part, they're really using their telecom services for leisure, for entertainment, for relaxation, right? The coronavirus pandemic has flipped that whole pattern, that whole assumption model. So now what we have is people not only just working from home in the day, they're working from home throughout 24/7, because there are even folks who would have gone to the office after hours, late night shifts, business process outsourcing offices and so on. They would have housed employees at their offices during those late night hours. Now, because of the new normal, those employees are being deployed home to do their after hour, their late night shift operations at home. So it means that one, the assumptions, our capacity assumptions that we've used to build our networks have to change. The type of traffic generated by our customers, moving away from more primarily download, consume traffic to two-way, full duplex, symmetrical traffic, that is going to increase. And as a result, we now have to relook in the most part, our roadmaps were already set, but now we have to borrow Jenson's word, accelerate some of our technology roadmaps, create our access networks to support these new traffic patterns, these new traffic behaviors, to be able to deliver the type of telecom network that our customers not only want, but demand, what they need in order to operate. It's no longer just about going to school to learn. We have now a significant amount of our population will be learning from home. And you know, touching a little bit on Jenson's side, even with the business customers, now where you have businesses not only deploying staff at home, so now the staff are working from home, but now the critical infrastructure that they historically housed at their offices, right, their servers and so on. Now that if they're going to not have all of these offices anymore, some of those critical centralized platforms now have to be deployed in the cloud. And they'll be coming to the telecom providers to provide that for them, right? Provide extensions at home. So these are the sort of things that we now have to evolve as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And what I would say to close off, my last point is another critical change that we're going to have to realize and respond to would be that because primarily people are now working a lot more from home, our ability to detect and respond and to resolve issues and outages has to increase. Because before, you know, again, the majority of our customers would work at work, but when they get home, it's all about leisure. If their services are down, you know, fine, it's substitutable, they could do something else. But now when they're earning their living from home, you know, that no longer is a choice. So we have to be able to detect those outages or issues when they happen and be able to react and respond and resolve them in a lot faster time in order to ensure that our customers can work, they can live, they can heal, they can learn while they're at home.
You know, Kurleigh, your answer is fascinating to me, and it sounds, if I can just quickly summarize, it sounds like what you're saying is that fundamentally what we're going to see is an incredible increase in demand, and that the need for resilience is going to be super critical for every telecoms operator, far more than ever was in the past. And what I want to ask you and Gary and Jenson is, I mean, I'm not a technology guy, but it sounds very expensive. It sounds like companies are going to now have to invest a significant, even more than they have been in their networks in the past. Gary, Kurleigh, Jenson, do you agree with that? Do you see any challenges with that? What's your response to that?
Well, look, I'd say that the telecoms business has always been pretty expensive, right? There is a reason why the telecoms businesses traditionally throughout our region, where we don't have a ton of scale in a lot of these smaller markets, were initially dominated almost solely by governments. They're the only ones who could look at a business case to run a telecoms network in Montserrat and say, yeah, let's go ahead, right? Because the scale just wasn't there. So invariably, governments were the ones that would have to step up, because the telecoms business and the infrastructure required to run it has never, to my mind, been cheap. And I don't see it getting any cheaper in the future, frankly, though it is evolving clearly and getting smaller and getting way more efficient. So yeah, the investments we're going to have to make in delivering services and products to an evolving customer base is not going to be cheap, which is why there's such a huge premium on running as efficient an operation as you possibly can, right? So that is where we are focused like a laser, which is why I'm saying we need to take the learnings coming out of COVID-19 and this pandemic and make permanent a lot of the efficiency gains we've seen from standing up stuff like virtual stores, for instance. And so we say we're going to stand up virtual stores, close block and steel stores, for instance, that you have to power, secure with security, put in a bunch of infrastructure, and people immediately believe, oh, you're going to lose jobs, you're going to send jobs away. Nothing could be further from the truth. All those colleagues, all those agents can now be arrayed around a virtual store capacity. And the more colleagues that are arrayed around such a capability, the better the service the customer is going to be able to get. So we've already proven during the COVID-19 pandemic that we can reassign our colleagues very well. We've had to reassign a bunch of colleagues who used to be out on the road selling, for instance, have suddenly become telesales operators and have become increasingly efficient at it, right? So I would say that overall, we've got to, as we always have as operators, focus on running the most efficient operation we can possibly run. And that is going to mean, as you've been telegraphing, David, the fact that we're going to have to just take the permanent stuff we've learned, make permanent the stuff we've learned coming out of COVID, and move ourselves in a direction of more online and digital interaction, and just make sure that the cost of acquiring a customer, both a B2B customer and a residential or consumer-based customer, comes down as far as we can possibly get it. Because the cost of this infrastructure, to my mind, and the scale we're going to need to make it pay back in the kind of pace that we would want to isn't going to happen. We're not going to get millions of people and consumers overnight. That is going to stay the same. The cost of the infrastructure isn't going down. So we just have to become more efficient. We've been doing that. We continue to do that. And pandemics, like we've had to experience now, have accelerated the need to do that. But we need all of our stakeholders to play along. So we need governments to start moving in the direction of only digital interactions. Governments need to start modeling the way, right? And suggesting, for instance, and I'm just throwing this out as a wild sort of, but a big, hairy, audacious goal is that, look, we should be cashless in some of these smaller economies. An archipelago like the Bahamas with 700 islands, nearly 25 or 26 of them inhabited, stretching across thousands of kilometers. Why are we still using cash, right? We should set a date for going cashless. If China can be almost cashless with a couple billion people, I know we can do it in Bahamas and Barbados, right? So governments need to start modeling the way to move us down this efficiency path, and to sort of take advantage of what I call the digital premium, in order to ensure that we're going to be able to afford to spend the kind of money where we have to spend on infrastructure in these markets that are virtually all of them subscale.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Kurleigh, do you want to just, before I go to Jenson to talk about the changing shape of business, do you just want to come in on this question about the costs of investing in the network going forward, given what we're seeing and given the implications for the industry?
Yeah. And what I would say is, and I think I sort of touched on it in my original answer, is that for the most part, we were already on the roadmap to getting to those, to the networks that will support this, right? I mean, Cable and Wireless has 4G in the majority, if not all of its markets across the Caribbean. We do have, quality broadband networks, whether partially or fully deployed in a number of the markets as well. So that was part of the roadmap. So it really just speaks to us efficiently and in a focused manner, accelerating where need be. That sort of adoption, that rollout, that full migration to sort of the new network that will support the new normal. Thankfully, it's not as if it's disruptive where we have to change our roadmap or change the networks we were looking to deploy. The networks we were looking to deploy, for the most part, would support the new normal. But it's just a case of us in many cases accelerating those roadmaps or being focused on executing in the time frames by which we had set out for ourselves, and not pushing it back by 2 and 3 years and so on. The other thing, you talked about the cost of maintaining. So there's 2 sides to that. One, thankfully, most of these new networks are actually more effective to maintain, right? If you talk about a fiber to the home network, a passive fiber to the home network versus a power hungry, legacy, obsolete copper network, it's actually cheaper to maintain the fiber network. So from that perspective, there are incentives for us to get to that new normal network, the network that's going to support the new normal, because the maintenance cost of that network can be less. And now we can focus our energies and our efforts on ensuring that the network performs, and we're able to respond and react and restore to the levels that our customers would expect us and need us to under the new normal circumstances.
Thanks, Kurleigh. That's an excellent insight. So I have just one more question from me and it's for Jenson. But I want to just reassure our audience that I am seeing your questions, and as soon as and for the remainder of the session after this next answer from Jenson, I'm going to go to the questions that have been sent. So we are paying attention, and you will get an opportunity to have your question answered. But Jenson, your background is in business. You lead the Barbados business unit for Flow, but you have an extensive and deep experience dealing with businesses and small and medium enterprises across the Caribbean. And you understand a great deal about the way business in the region works. And I want your perspective on the changing face of business, not just the telecoms business, but what changes, and you've touched on some of them, but I want to give you an opportunity to explore that a little bit further. What changes do you think are likely from businesses in the region? What are some of the things you're seeing? What are some of the trends? And what in particular you think is going to be permanent? What are some of the permanent impacts of COVID for the business community and for us, and how we treat with that community?
Thanks, David. That's a big question. I think the best way to think about business is to break it into segments. So we have our small and medium-sized enterprises in our region that makes up a lion's share of employment. Indeed, they are the engine of our economies. And then you have the larger enterprise customers, the banks, large insurance companies, large distribution companies, and then of course you have the government sector. And the COVID crisis has impacted those three segments in different ways. On the SMB side, we're seeing that it's going to be difficult for many of these SMBs to survive, and they're going to have to adapt very quickly to the impact of COVID. They're going to need to embrace digital a lot more, much like we are considering. They're going to have to be a lot more agile in how they reach their customers. They're going to have to think more about things like delivery, for example. We've seen, delivery of items, food, supermarket goods, the delivery to your homes. We've seen that spike as well. So the SMB segment needs to be a lot more agile, will need to be a lot more agile. And the way they do that is to leverage the technology. Fortunately for us here in Barbados, we have a full fiber network. And one of the key programs that we've employed is to move our customers from legacy networks onto the new network. And that does a couple of things. Kurleigh touched on the efficiencies that it brings to our business, et cetera. But I think more importantly, it enables our customers. It enables our customers to be more agile. It enables our customers to reach their customers in a more wholesome and holistic way, leveraging the technology, leveraging the digital platform. So the SMB segment, we are very close to. Indeed, when the COVID crisis hit, we reached out to those customers because we knew that there's going to be, we're going to go through a tough time here. And we worked with them to figure out how we can right-size the services that they take from us during periods of low footfall, or indeed if they had to shut down completely, with a view that they will pick up when things get back to more normalcy. So, we're working closely with them, and the impact has been severe and significant, but it's required them to be more agile, and we are supporting them. We're enabling them with the technology, with the network, with the platforms that we have to do so. And that's on the SMB side. On the large enterprise side, we're seeing those customers going through very similar considerations that we are. So, Gary mentioned it. We're looking at our colleagues, and we are determining what percentage of our colleagues are going to be working from home on a much more permanent basis. Our large customers are doing exactly the same thing. So all of them that we've spoken to are talking about how do we make this new way of working more permanent. And so again, the network is key, critical for obvious reasons. But also we have been able to develop solutions to help our larger customers leverage things like business class support, even though you're at home. Beefing up your security, your internet security, to make sure that when you're conducting business from home, you have that level of security. Our speeds and feeds obviously are, ahead of the market, and so we leverage that. And so the large enterprise are a bit more resilient, but they've changed, much like we are, the way they think about executing their business, change the way their staff indeed are working. And so we are developing and have developed solutions to support them on that. I think the biggest impact, certainly here in Barbados, and I'm sure in most of the region, has been on the hospitality segment. And, in many regards, it's been completely shut down. I think we're seeing pockets of activity starting up in different places. And so, that's been hit hard. What we've done, again, is, work very closely with our hospitality customers. We know it's a tough time for them. We know it's going to be hard. And so we're working very closely with them to make sure that they have the capacity that they need now, but also looking forward to understand what that capacity requirement is going to be as tourists return to our shores. So the impact, David, has been different depending on the segment of the market. I would say what's critical in all markets, in all segments of the market, is moving our customers from legacy services to new or next gen services. So we talk about moving our customers from copper to fiber networks. We talk about moving our customers from what we call premise-based solutions to cloud-based solutions, giving them more flexibility. These are things that we, as I said earlier, already started to develop, already started to move. And what we're doing now is we're looking at the opportunity to accelerate that and support our customers. So, it's been tough, David, but there are opportunities. There are opportunities for us, there are opportunities for our customers, and there are opportunities for our customers' customers to really leverage the network and make use of the digital platforms that exist already. I hope I've answered your question.
Jenson, you have, and thank you so much. So gentlemen, we have a ton of questions from the audience, and I'm going to go through them. Let's consider this a bit of a lightning round so that we can get through as many as possible. I'm just going to call on one of you and ask you to respond. Gary, this one is from David Salomon. He's asking about the future potential for cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, and wants to know what steps, if any, are being taken to explore this. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in the Bahamas in that regard?
Well, yeah, Bahamas has actually kicked off and is probably one of the more progressive governments and, more importantly, central banks regionally. Has kicked off a sand dollar project where they are moving towards a digital currency and digital wallets in general. Look, I'm a huge fan of the potential for digital wallets. Digital currencies are obviously a huge topic right now. There's a hugely speculative element to them. So I won't opine on sort of the potential future on a digital currency or other. What I can say is that digital wallets and the advancement towards cashless societies is an inevitable path that we are going to have to go down. And what form that is going to take exactly is still being sorted out in the competition of ideas and of propositions and of central banks and governments' willingness to accommodate the various ideas that are out there. What is without doubt, though, is the fact that we're moving towards a cashless society where we're going to be interacting out of some form of digital wallet or other. And so we want to be obviously in the middle of that. We are going to be huge facilitators of a world in which transactions are concluded digitally. And we're going to continue to play a role there. We, as a telecoms business, have been obviously thinking about the fintech space for a long time. There was a sense for a while that, you know, it requires scale, quite a bit more scale, same scale I talked about earlier when I talked about the investments we have to make in these very expensive network elements. And so we're a subscale region. And there was a thought that, you know, we were too subscale to really consider deeply entering the fintech space. That may be changing now, again, precipitated by, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that people have gravitated so quickly towards digital interaction with service providers. So we'll see where that goes with respect to our business and how deeply we get into the fintech space. But what is, I think, unassailable is the fact that we are moving down our path inexorably towards cashless societies right across the globe. And we are particularly well suited to facilitate that process.
Thanks, Gary. If we have time, I'll try to come back to this point about, you know, the digitization of our economies, because it sounds like that's where we're heading. And if we have time, I want to talk to you to ask you if you have any thoughts on what governments need to be doing to encourage that. But the next couple of questions are for Kurleigh. Again, Kurleigh, quick lightning round. They're from senior broadcast journalist Stephen Cummings. Stephen wants to know, you know, your view, how robust is the telecom sector in Trinidad and Tobago to withstand, you know, major economic shock? You know, basically he wants to know how badly you think it's going to affect, you know, Trinidad and Tobago from an economic point of view. And then his other question is it seems to be about competition. He's suggesting that, you know, companies at the moment are competing in silos, and he wants to know whether, you know, COVID is going to force greater collaboration between competitors. All right,
thanks for that, David. Good morning, Stephen. Thanks for your questions. On the ability for the telecom sector in Trinidad to sustain a long crisis, I would say it's very well positioned for a couple of reasons. I mean, you have one of the major operators being majority owned by the government, and obviously the government is going to do what it can to preserve you know, its economy, and telecom would obviously be a critical foundation to that economic activity. But moreover, on top of that, you're also well supported as a country by, you know, two significantly I guess invested and established multinational operators, which would be able to lend its regional presence to support Trinidad and Tobago in the event of any sort of you know, elongated crisis. You know, and I saw in the question you mentioned not just COVID but something else. So I would say we're pretty well positioned. You know, a lot of the you know, international capacity that is used to deliver telecom services to Trinidad and Tobago is owned by, you know, the operators that operate there. So it's not a case where they might run foul of having to purchase international capacity. Connectivity is owned by the operators that are based there for the most part. So I would say that, you know, I mean, out of respect for the other questions, so I can't spend too much time on it, but I would say that Trinidad is fairly well positioned. Obviously, if the crisis continues to span for longer, you know, there will be tweaks and levers we'll have to twist and pull. But I would say definitely the country and the economy is, and the sector as a whole is well positioned to withstand a fairly long, you know, crisis period. On the second question, I think it had to do with
collaboration, greater collaboration.
I would say, to be honest, in Trinidad and Tobago, yes, there's heavy competition at the retail front. And to be honest, that is what was demanded by the public and the government, right? They wanted competition and they wanted aggressive competition, you know, so that customers get the best deal and high quality services, right? At affordable and efficient prices. which we do see existing in the market. But do not let that aggressive competition on the retail front lead you to believe that there is no collaboration on the back end, on the wholesale front. There's a lot of collaboration ongoing in Trinidad and Tobago right now. And I'll use two examples. One, the internet exchange point in Trinidad. So Trinidad has a very vibrant internet exchange infrastructure between the competing internet service providers, where they interconnect their domestic networks and are able to, if they see a need to or demand to, mutually beneficial reason to, exchange local internet traffic on island. And what we've seen, and I mean in recent times, especially with COVID and all this work from home, is we've seen the traffic on that internet exchange point spike. And of course, Trinidad is one of, I think the only, or probably one of two Caribbean markets in the entire Caribbean that have two exchange points, right? We actually have redundant exchange points in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's one example of where the operators do collaborate. And then from deploying services into rural areas, I saw some of the questions talking about connecting people in rural areas. To be quite honest, both as a function of competition and as a function of, to some extent, collaboration with the regulator, there is a definite effort to expand and move broadband networks more into the rural areas, right? Where, the regulator did a study of areas that are not serviced by broadband about 5 years ago. And they came up with a list of 200 areas. And when we fast forward 5 years later, 90% of those areas are now served by a broadband provider, right? So there are examples and there's ample evidence where the operators have been able to cooperate and collaborate in order to deliver tangible benefits to the public and to the users of telecom services in Trinidad.
If I could just add to Kurleigh's point on cooperation, on infrastructure as well. I mean, we tower share, we share ducts. The key to me, Chairman, is that we allow these collaborations to occur commercially and on the basis of arm's length negotiations between the providers who have the responsibility to allocate the capital required to not only build, but maintain these networks and not have it prescribed by people with the best of intentions, but who don't have all of the variables that are required in order to push us in a particular direction or other. I think the best way to advance the kind of cooperation you mentioned and the questioner mentioned is to have it happen at the end of arm's length negotiations between competing entities. And when it does, it usually works out best, not just for the entities, but for customers as well.
Thank you very much, Gary. That I think is an excellent point. My next question, so we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to, if possible, get to a couple of questions if we can before we close. My next question, maybe Jenson, you can start by just talking a little bit about, what are we doing for students? You mentioned briefly, but what are we doing for poor communities and people who have challenges right now because of COVID?
Sure. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we saw very early that we were going to have to move to a much more digital learning platform. With students being at home. Also, it was clear, and the government made it very clear to us very early on that we need to make sure that no student, no area, no family is left behind and remain online. So we did a number of things. One key one was we zero-rated a number of websites that allowed students, people to access critical information, critical data, critical websites at no cost. So that was a big one. The second big one was working with the Teachers Association to make sure that our teachers also had the requisite bandwidth, the requisite service to make sure that they were able to broadcast the lessons, right? Because that's another critical part. So we work very closely, David, with our stakeholders and our customers. We're also very, clear that, some customers were going to have difficulty sort of paying as well. So we work very closely with them in a consultative way to make sure that, you know, they remain connected, you know, maybe with a smaller sort of bandwidth footprint, but still remain connected, and make arrangements and agreements with them to make sure that they can pay us when they're more able to. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time, David, making sure that communities that are disadvantaged or students that may not have the access that they need have that access, but also for our customers who may not be in a position to pay as frequently, we work with them to make sure that they remain connected. So we've done a lot in that regard.
Thank you very much, Jenson. Gentlemen, Gary has spoken very eloquently about the opportunities, but let's also be clear. The pandemic will have and has already had a devastating impact on us, on all telecoms operators financially. Can I, as we get ready to close, we have about a couple of minutes left. Can I just get some quick thoughts from you about how you think we're going to define, how you think telecoms operators, the industry as a whole, not LLA or cable wireless, but how do you think the industry is going to manage this difficult period where so many people are unemployed and we've seen this devastating financial impact?
So if I could just jump in there quickly and say, one of our mandates was to keep all of our colleagues employed. Another one was to keep customers connected. So one of our mandates, again, culturally, was worst time ever to actually start disconnecting colleagues wholesale because they've run into a tough economic period, are unable to pay bills as agreed, and then you cut them off. So they're stuck at home all day without our service. Because the upside to this pandemic is the fact that telecoms operators have become heroes, right? Our services have literally been the lifeline to a number, hundreds of thousands and millions of people who are now at home more and who need our services to work and entertain and educate their kids and themselves. So the demand and the view of our services, I think, has improved dramatically coming out of this crisis. And I think what we have a responsibility to do now is to continue to evolve our services to make sure that we meet the needs of what is going to be a changing consumer and business set of operating models. And look, the way to do that and to be able to afford to do that is, like I said, we've got to work like Kurleigh, Jenson, and I do every day on making sure we're operating the most efficient business model we possibly can. That's what we get up and figure out how we can do every single day. How can we eke out every single extra penny and dollar out of the cost of delivering products and services to customers, and all the while ensuring they get the kind of customer experience that will keep them coming back and hopefully telling a friend. So that's, I think, the challenge we have is making sure that we're constantly operating the most efficient model we can, even as we ensure that we are evolving the products and services and future-proofing the products and services we offer to customers in a way that keeps not just them, but their communities and their overall economies competitive.
Yeah.
Gary, go ahead, Jenson.
Yeah, I would say, David, I think how we get through this is to do what we've always done, continue to do what we've always done, which is stay close to our customers, right? Stay close to our customers, understand what they're going through, listen to them, and then, as Gary mentioned, future-proof our solution. So, for us, it's customer centricity is the only way we're going to be able to get through this this difficult time.
Yeah, well said, Jess.
And Kurleigh, anything last words you want to add to that?
About managing through these times, I mean, Gary has put the stake in the ground. We have to be as efficient as possible. I want to add to that, we have to be innovative. There's one thing just to do what you do as efficiently. The other thing to do is do things differently, right? So certainly the pressure is going to be on us to innovate as much as possible to meet and exceed customer expectations while still delivering shareholder value, because as your question sort of touched on, we do have a responsibility to deliver on shareholder value as well. So we do have to relook all of our operations, scrutinize how we do things, and apply ourselves as as I guess, learn telecom professionals to be as innovative as possible.
Gentlemen, we're a little over time, but it's been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank each of you. Gary, thank you so much for being here. Kurleigh, Jenson, I've found the responses and the discussion to just be incredibly educational. We didn't get to all of the questions, but I think I tried to get to the themes which they raised. But I want to encourage our audience to stay with us. Keep attending CANTO Conversations. We will try to get some written responses to your questions to you with our three CEOs. So thank you everyone for your time this morning. Sorry that we ran a little bit over. Remember that the next webinar will be on Tuesday, 23rd of June at 10 a.m. Eastern. Please join the conversation when we focus on the why, the how, and what of data-driven video. And our guest speaker for that session will be Wouter Slot, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Divitel. Gary, Kurleigh, Jenson, thank you again, and I wish you all a great remainder to your week.
Hey, thanks for having us, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Gentlemen, it's our pleasure. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe.